Hi, it's Andrew from Acuity Auto Redact. Welcome to the Data Protection Weekly podcast, where we wrap up all the biggest issues affecting data protection professionals in the UK each week.
If you're a regular listener, well, firstly, I hope you're subscribed. But secondly, you'll know that I like to start with an imagined scenario that you can put yourself into. So imagine it's a normal afternoon and a colleague, perhaps a senior colleague, or it could be somebody who works for you, comes up to you and says, we've got this great new AI assistant, it's baked into some software, and it summarizes all of our customer calls and follow-up emails and sends us a message instantly. You're probably first thinking, wow, okay, that's going to make my life easier in some way. But what you should be thinking is, okay, but under the hood, what is that software doing? Because a lot of AI companies are producing some amazing solutions, but they're actually building on top of the big large language models offered by a range of companies. You probably know the types that I'm talking about: OpenAI, Google, Anthropic. And those tools are firing off an API call to those LLMs and are making a decision and a response based on that LLM doing the work. The tool that's being built just sits and lurks on the top with that tool doing the hard work. What if it turned out, though, that that tool was DeepSeek and it was running on a server in China? Have you checked that? Have you checked that it's actually the enterprise version of the model? Or is it one that's being kept open and allowed for training? So, this is what I want to get into today. If you don't know the engine that's actually powering the AI processes in your organization, you don't own the data. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's break down exactly how a software as a service AI app in your tech stack manages to embrace AI features. It might have been a non-AI tool that's just taken on some AI features, or it might be a new AI app. And this isn't to alarm people and make you think, well, you can't use these. You should use them if they're being used and developed ethically and responsibly, and you know how that data is being processed. Now, most AI software vendors do not build their own large language models from scratch. It's incredibly expensive to do this. It can cost millions and millions of pounds to develop a custom-made LLM. So often, they plug their interface and tool into systems like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, various open source models that are out there, and make a request to that large language model. So when you use the app, it'll take the data that you put into it. It will run some cleverly written prompts, maybe some custom settings to make the model work a bit better. If the developer's gone on the extra step, they might have been able to refine and create a kind of a custom modified version of that model that has a couple of tweaks to it to do a certain job well, but often it's just a series of clever prompts and then an instruction for the LLM to return the data in a way that that program can deal with and then integrate it into its output so you see the AI output. Why do developers do this? It's just a lot cheaper and a lot quicker to build an AI app that works this way rather than developing the entire process from scratch. Now, this does mean that you can't just hand out a vendor questionnaire and say, hey, how do you process my data? If it uses AI, you need to make sure that in the questionnaire that you give them, that it mentions what model they're using, how it's been applied, and when you talk to them, check that they're transparent about this, that they really explain this is the model we use and it's been completely paid for and it's not being used in a way in which that company gets to then train their models on the data or sell the data elsewhere. Because most AI companies that offer the ability for you to plug in your tool to them using what's known as an application programming interface, or an API if you want to get technical, but essentially just think of it like a big plug that their application plugs into the large language model AI from OpenAI, Google, or Anthropic, or similar company. When that connection is made, if they haven't explicitly bought a package that has strict data protection controls and is designed for enterprise use, and that they've risk assessed that isn't being used to train models or to give the data elsewhere, the terms and conditions might say that that tool can use the data to train its models. And suddenly you've got a GDPR nightmare on your hand, because you've suddenly monetized the data that your customers are putting into your product, and that you've lost control of it because it's being used for any purpose that the other company has put within their terms and conditions. So you need to be really, really clear. So let's get actionable. How can we handle this potential unknown engine API AI risk? Well, here are 3 concrete steps you can implement first thing on a Monday morning to make sure that your supply chain and that your processing chain is really transparent and you know how data is being processed. The first thing I'd recommend is to just ditch the "do you use AI" question. It's too broad. If you ask a vendor, do they use AI, you'll get the usual marketing spin of how great the AI they use is and it's made their product super intelligent and more desirable. Ask them this question: what underlying AI foundational models do you rely on to provide your service? Do you call these via an API? And who are the sub-processors that host and run these models? Ask to see this and any API architecture diagrams that they can share. That's important for the data flow. If they're not telling you what APIs their systems are using, then they are not telling you how the data is flowing through their system. They are just turning around and saying, trust us with the data. But actually, that API is a tunnel going out potentially to a big third-party provider. And you have the right to know this. The second thing is to verify the API tier in their data processing agreement. Go through it and check the data processing agreement to see what API tier they're using. Are they using an enterprise tier? That's a good sign that they're using one that doesn't have retention. And then when you read what API tier they're using, look it up on the actual provider. So for example, Acuity Auto Redact uses the enterprise version of Gemini. We've locked it so it can only be called at EU data centers, and we outline exactly how we use it. These are things that you should be checking for. If the data is then being processed by a third-party AI, you need to know which model's being used, check it's the enterprise version, and then check against that model's terms and conditions under that license of how the data will be used. Just a little bit of extra due diligence. I appreciate it's a bit of a pain, but if you're jumping in a contract with a AI startup, it's really important that you know who is the underlying engine under the hood that's really doing the power work of the data, because 99% of AI companies, that's how they work. And then the third thing is use some API traffic monitoring. You can often on SaaS apps see what API calls they are making to third-party providers. Often you'll see responses when you go into the console, not always, but sometimes you can press F12, click on network, click on console and see what it's doing. And this isn't a foolproof way to check, because a lot of that stuff's happening on their server and it just might be a few little traces bleed through in the network logs. But ask someone in your IT team just to see, is it going off and doing something unexpected? So for example, if a company says, no, we use Anthropic as our model, and suddenly you can see when you press F12 and click on network that the app is making a couple of conversations to OpenAI, you'd probably want to turn around and say, oh, I didn't know you talked to OpenAI to do some of your work. Could you check us? Now, this isn't foolproof, doesn't always work, perfectly, because again, the work could be taking place with their server making the connections to the third party and you don't get to see it. But I have in the past seen this when I've pressed F12, and sometimes the companies come back and said, oh yeah, we changed model to a different provider, but we didn't tell anybody. At which point I said to them, I'm sure there was, a really good reason for that. And, I'm sure that made your application much better. But I didn't know that when I used your service. And now you're sending my personal data into a service in America that I didn't opt into. You probably should have told me. In fact, you really should have told me, and I would have appreciated that. And, most times they're like, yeah, cool, we should have done it. We apologize. And, you could go and report them, but that they're going to change the policy and you can see they've done it. So, there's a certain level of just making sure they understand their corporate responsibilities a bit more. And that, if they are changing models, that they're telling their customers they're doing it and they're getting the consent of their customers to do it, because essentially they could be passing all their customers' data to a new third party. So to wrap up, the days of just deploying black box AI apps and, looking the other way, they are long since over. You really should understand when you opt into a third-party AI tool that probably they're outsourcing the actual AI work to another provider, and you need to make sure that they're doing that in a way where the data is being processed sensibly, safely, and that they're using the enterprise tier that isn't training the model. And if you're not comfortable with that company processing the data, don't go with them. You need to make sure that you understand that and have a tight wrap on that. Okay, so obviously thank you as always for tuning into Data Protection Weekly. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion on AI. If you are wanting to use an AI tool that ethically processes data in order to speed up document redaction, do check out Acuity Auto Redact. I'm one of the founders, and what Acuity Auto Redact does is you put your documents in and your CCTV footage, and using EU data centers hosted by Google and the enterprise version of Gemini, it will scan those documents and videos for PII, for people, for things that you want to have redacted. It will automatically do the redaction job it thinks is best, and then hand it over to you as the expert to redact additional events, PII, other information, other requests that you have it to redact, and even unredact if you think that it's been overzealous, so you're in control. But it's like having the best and most amazing assistant helping you do a data subject access request. I was talking with a customer just a couple of days ago, and they said that it cut the time that they were dealing with DSAR redaction down to about 5% of what it was before. They went from using a tool on the PC where they were clicking everything to redact to essentially having 99% of the work done for them, with obviously human in the loop, which is really important, reviewing the output, which made the job so much easier. So please do check out Acuity Auto Redact, and I am looking forward to talking about another data protection issue next week with you. Thank you.
Data Protection Weekly.